Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports at WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Remember, in these videos, I take about 8 used firearms that have come into the store and give you guys about a 2 to 4 minute review on each to give you guys an idea of some different stuff out there on the market. Remember, the point of this video is strictly to be entertaining and educational. I am not making this video to sell anything, to keep in accordance with YouTube's policies. Anyway, guys, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it now. Remembering the format of this video, we start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses. Starting off with our number one spot, we have a firearm that comes to us from a local viewer and customer. This is a North American Arms Sidewinder mini revolver. This is a little bit different from their traditional type of feel on their firearms. And real quick, I want to apologize for the lighting. I'm in the process of moving my studio here to a different part of the store. I have temporary lighting up over there, which is why you're getting a shadow. Hopefully it works for this video, but by next week, we should have better lighting up for you guys. The Sidewinder. North American Arms, first of all, this company was founded in the early 1970s, known as Rocky Mountain Firearms, about 1972, 1973. Now, after only a couple years of operation, it did come under new ownership, where it did get the new name North American Arms, which we know today, and they are still in business today, making primarily these mini revolvers. Now, they've always been known as producing the sort of mouse gun stylized firearms that were popular around the turn of the century, sort of the vest pocket, poker table type self-defense firearms, backup, deep concealment carry firearms. Now, the design for this would actually be the brainchild of a company known as Freedom Arms, which was developed around the same time, around the 1970s, 1975, 1976 is when Freedom Arms would come into existence. And they would come up with a series of this, but really the main bread and butter of Freedom Arms was their larger caliber revolvers. Now, one of the two founders of the company is Richard or Dick Kasul, the other being Wayne Baker, Freedom Arms. Kasul, everybody knows the name. He would go on to develop the very popular 454 Kasul. Now, they would have larger variations of the single action army type variation, single action clones off of the Colt, popular Peacemaker pistol. And those would be chambered most of the time in very large calibers. So 357, of course, 50 AE, 41 mag, 454 Kasul, of course, 475 line bob, which is a monster of a round. They would really get away from these small concealable revolvers. So in 1990, they would sell the rights to this design to North American Arms. And North American Arms has perfected, they came up with a safer version of this with the safety notches between the cylinder, the chamber cuts. So you could actually carry with a full cylinder loaded. And they were mainly meant for small caliber. It was really 22 long rifle, 22 Magnum, and they have a black powder variation of it as well. Now, in 1997, North American Arms would come out with a Guardian pistol, which was their first introduction of a semi-automatic, and that's been met with mild success since the late 1990s. They're somewhat more of an oddity and collectible today, but what they are really, really popular for is these little mouse deep concealment 22 revolvers. This one here is known as the Sidewinder. Unlike most of their revolvers, most of them have a base pin that removes and you take out the entire cylinder to to load your cylinder. You then replace the whole thing. This is actually a traditional, I gotta go to half cock, sorry. This is a traditional rock out cylinder, which you can load with your 5 rounds, close it back much the same way, and you're in action, single action only. It does come with a conversion on 22 long rifle, so 22 mag, 22 long rifle. You just unthread this front base pin retainer, I guess crane retainer, screw, whatever you would want to call it. You can pop this one in and then you've done your conversion. And again, Sidewinder, swing out cylinder. Most of these retail brand new around the $200 to $300 mark. Used markets usually around, depending on what it is, $100 to $200 on like their mini revolver, something like this, a little bit more expensive, $200 to $300, somewhere in that range. So, especially right now in the market, which is in the process of cooling down, but things are still slightly higher than normal, but they're dropping pretty quickly. But anyway, a really, really cool firearm, a really, really good backup, or something that you can take with you on a day when you don't want to carry your primary EDC. Very lightweight, easy to conceal, easy to keep with you. You don't have to go unarmed for the day. Something that's going to weigh less than your cell phone. So really, really cool products. Happy to get this in. And again, thank you to our local viewer and customer. Okay, up next is a rifle that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. this is an SKS. More specifically, this is the Yugoslavian variant M59-66, chambered in 7.62 by 39. Now, the story with this would actually begin back in Germany during World War II in the early 1940s with the development of what would be known as the MP43 and 44, or later the Sturmgewehr rifle, chambered in an intermediate cartridge, the 7.92 by 33 millimeter Kurz round. Now, Russia and Germany have been really watching each other closely before and during World War II with the development of their small arms. Germany went into the G41 because of Russia's development with the SVT-38 and SVT-40. Now, Russia's paying attention to the intermediate cartridge of the 7.92 by 33 and wanted to develop their own variation. So in 1943, Sergei Simonov began development of what would later become this rifle, the SKS Rifle, chambered in an intermediate cartridge of 7.62 by 39. Now, the SKS did not make it to World War II service. Final development of the rifle completed in 1945 and then would start going into production. Now, in Russia, these would, of course, see a very, very, very limited amount of military service because the AK-47 would come online just a couple short years later in 1947 and really make the SKS an obsolete rifle. However, there were other countries that liked this type of technology and would adopt this for their military services. Most notably, you would see this exact package in Romania, Yugoslavia, and China. Now, in 1959, Yugoslavia is looking at changing their current bolt-action loadout with the 1948 variant of the 47 and 48 Mauser rifles, which I've done in previous videos, and wanted to go to something again, to an intermediate semi-automatic rifle. Having noticed success in Germany with the G41 and G43 concept, they weren't quite going with the AK, although they would go to the Yugoslavian variations of the AK rifle, which of course many of us know today. But they would stick with this for the time being. So in 1959, they would adopt this variation of the rifle. However, the earlier ones looked more indicative of the earlier Soviet SKS, as they did not have the grenade launching spigot and grenade launching sights on it. You would have a blade bayonet. Otherwise, functionally identical to the early M59 SKS. Now, in 1966, they would adapt the rifle for grenade launching capability. You see this very iconic grenade launching spigot up at the front. They did the same thing with their AKs and wanted to make them adaptable for front loaded and front fired grenades, which is why the current Yugoslavian AKs have an elongated gas system. They have a reinforced and captive dust cover so they don't blow off under the extreme pressures. Most other countries used a device mounted underneath the barrel, like the United States did with the M203, but I digress. So they would come out with this variation in 1966 known as the 5966, which is this. Very, very popular on the current market, very unique looking rifle, very interesting looking rifle, and very desirable and collectible as far as SKSs go. Typically, you find the Chinese as the least expensive. Most of those have been brought in. If you're going to get an SKS, typically what you find are the Chinese. Romanians are very rare. The Yugoslavian ones are not too common to find right now either. They did come in pretty large numbers back in the 90s and early 2000s, but there haven't been any more importation of the Yugoslavian variants of the SKS in quite some time. Typically, for a long time, you could find them for $300 to $400 in the past 10 years, but lately they've gone way up. I'm seeing these things sell between $600 and $800 respectively on the market today based on condition. This particular one is an all-matching example. Very, very, very good condition and actually looks unissued and unfired, as the bolt and carrier are totally spotless. I mean, not a speck of gunpowder residue on them anywhere. So anyway, really, really cool rifle. Happy to get this one in, and this one came to us from a local seller as well. So happy to share that with you. Okay, up next I have a firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Nevada. So thank you so much for sending this one along to us. This is a Generation 4 Glock 17. Now, it's not just any Generation 4 Glock 17. It is a 25-year anniversary pistol, as it was the 25th year of it actually being in the United States, coming in 1986, not 25 years since its development in 1980. So a little bit of a misnomer there. The Glock 17 is a brainchild of Gaston Glock and was the first iteration of the Glock design. The Glock 17 was really the one that started it all. Now, in 1980, the Austrian military had put out a solicitation for a new handgun design. Gaston Glock, who had secured previous military contracts on mainly things like entrenching tools, he had other patents on things like curtain rods, very sort of a weird assortment or a mix of different products that he had designed and developed, mainly out of use of polymers and light plastics. When he got wind that there was going to be a new handgun trials, he decided to try his hand at firearms, and in his garage developed what would later become the Glock 17. Now, at the time, in the late 70s, early 80s, this polymer frame handgun concept was not anything that was very popular. There had been a couple other designs that came before it, but they were never met with widespread use or acceptance in the gun market or by many militaries or anything along that line. Now, a lot of people looked at his design, sort of laughed at it. Reminds me of John Moses Browning when he first pitched his first gas-operated machine gun to the United States military, kind of this weird contraption that nobody had ever seen. Gaston Glock had similar encounters when bringing this to the Austrian military for testing. However, it did outperform and was later selected in about 1981 as the military standard issue sidearm for the Austrian military. Now, a few years later, due to the big success of this firearm, it would start being imported into the United States for the American consumer market in 1986, which again in 2011, 25 years later, we would get the 25-year anniversary since its importation into the United States, again, not since its original development in 1980. This is a firearm that made a tremendous splash when it hit the market. Anywhere even to police departments, a lot of them transitioned away from revolvers and third-generation Smith & Wesson pistols in the 1980s and 1990s to Glocks. Glock had an interesting turn-in program for your old service revolver or old service pistol to get like a half price off on a new Glock 17 for your department. And of course, the brand has spiraled out of control into what it is today with huge amount of different offerings and different sizes and different calibers amongst many different generations. Gen 5 is, of course, where we are today. This was even, I don't know if a lot of you remember in the early 1990s and late 80s, there was a big splash about this being untraceable in metal detectors. People were going to get them onto airplanes and things like that. Die Hard 2, I'm a big fan of the Die Hard series, but they had talked about pulling the Glock 7, which was a porcelain firearm from Germany that couldn't be detected on metal detectors and would make more than any of you make in a year or a week or whatever it was in this statement. But really, really funny, kind of the cultural reaction to this pistol was very, it was a revolutionary sort of concept and very different concept at the time in the late 80s, early 90s. And of course, today polymer is what rules the roost on most designs that we see today. On the market, a traditional Glock 17 is not hugely valuable, and Glocks of all stripe right now are sort of dropping pretty quickly in price due to the market kind of cooling off. But you typically get into a used one of these right now. I'm seeing them anywhere from about the low fours to mid fours. Now, the 25-year anniversary in 2011, they would release 2,500 of these. It's funny, we're now in 2021, which would be the 35-year anniversary. I haven't seen any type of special release or a collector's series of those. It came in a silver hard case with a fitted foam insert with your back straps, and I think it originally came with probably 3 magazines. There's a cutout for 2, and it says Glock 25 years, Glock USA. They sold these brand new for $850. I have not seen much sales data on these, but I would not expect that it's probably nothing that's really kept a lot of its value. A lot of commemorative and special edition things are, in my opinion, as somebody who's been in this market for a while, they do not really recoup a lot of their original investment cost because most people who are interested in purchasing something like this would usually be a die-hard Glock collector. You have the little 25 years of perfection right up here on top of the slide as well. Which they're, Glocks in and of themselves are utilitarian. They're not inherently collectible. So I would think somebody would really be mainly after this is, I don't know how many, again, diehard Glock collectors are out there. I'm a huge fan of Glock, but I buy them as, utilitarian firearms, not as collectibles. So again, the market I'm a little bit fuzzy on. I couldn't find any sales data on them. So I'd assume it would sell somewhere in line, maybe a little bit higher than what just a normal Glock 17 Gen 4 would sell for. So anyway, kind of cool to get in and sort of talk about the development of Glock. It's a brand that I personally like. A lot of you guys know actually the Glock 17 is my go-to nightstand and outside the waistband carry. So I'm a big fan of this firearm. Very, very cool to get in and share with you guys. Okay, up next is a rifle that comes to us from a viewer in Arizona. So thank you so much for sending this one along to us. This is an Atlantic Arms. Really, it is a Romanian PM 63 parts kit built on a US-made receiver and barrel, known as the Battlefield Pickup Romanian AKM style of rifle. So everybody knows about the AK-47 developed by Soviet Russia, and later we get into the AKM, which is on a stand receiver. Now, a lot of the COM-block type countries were urged by Russia to move into the development of a similar standardized cartridge and weapons system. So a lot of countries like China, Romania, Yugoslavia, Poland, would move into, you know, the AKM style rifle, and it is actually the most commonly used rifle all around the world. Now, one most iconic sort of footprint of the AK variant would be those that have come out of Romania, mainly identifiable by this forward swoop dong, as it gets the name. Now, they'll come out with a variation replacing what they were using in service at the time, which was the PPS H41 and 43. They would come out with this in the 1960s, the PM63, their AKM variant rifle, of course, in 7.62 by 39. They also had the PM65, which basically was an underfolder variation of this, where the dong is swooped in a backward variation. Like a lot of the washers we get today, they had variations with just the fixed, you know, the standard stock set out here. And then they had an AK-74 version as well, just like a lot of the complex countries would move into the 5.45 by 39 going into the future. But this is probably one of the most iconic Romanian configurations you can find. Now, the cool thing about this and this series of rifles that Atlantic puts together is this is built on a complete original military parts kit off a PM63 kit. Has an original dated receiver or trunnion here of 1968. So again, aside from the, you know, trigger control group, the receiver, and the barrel, you're getting an original parts kit. Now, the interesting thing about the market on these is the parts kits in and of themselves used to be very, very inexpensive. Back, you know, 5 to 10 years ago, you could pick up a complete Romanian kit for $200 to $300. You could buy your receiver and barrel and build one yourself for probably around the $500 mark. Atlantic Arms, until recently, would actually sell these battlefield pickups for $600 to $700, which as the price was actually a really good bargain. If you go look at their website today, they're actually selling these around $1,000 plus, which is a little bit nuts. Given what it is. However, the problem is the parts kits have completely dried up and they've gotten very, very expensive. When you're talking about surplus of any kind, whether it's firearms or parts kits, when they are widely available, they are always dirt cheap. As soon as the last one slides over the retail counter, the prices on them double, triple, and quadruple in some cases very, very, very quickly, which is why I always say if you're interested in getting into something that's either on a surplus kit or a surplus firearm, to jump on it when it's available, even if you're not super interested in it, and make a great investment, because once the supply is gone, they go up hugely in price. People are paying, like, I'm seeing AIM-74 kits, complete kits right now, for like $1,500 on Gunbroker. You could get a built AIM-74 for like $800 just a year or two ago. So it's just crazy what kind of happens with the market on something like that. They are cool rifles. The Atlantic, you know, builds are actually known to be pretty well done, pretty good quality. I haven't heard any complaints or people having issues with these rifles, you know, taking them out on the range. And you kind of get the cool features of having it on an original PM63 kit. I do know that they have them on their website again today, but again, they are very, very expensive. So, but you know, even washers and stuff like that are getting up there in price. So you have to kind of, at this point, they're, I guess, relegated more as collectibles than shooters at the price, but still really cool nonetheless. Happy to get this in. I don't know what this would sell for. I would be hesitant to call this a used rifle since it's built on a used kit. I guess the receiver and the barrel are used now, but it might, you know, a used one would probably retail in about the $800 to $1,000 mark, I would guess. But anyway, really, really cool to get that in and happy to share it with you. Okay, up next is a pretty interesting and unique animal that comes to us from a viewer down in Texas. So thank you so much for sending this one along to us. This is a firearm that is not too often seen and is also not one that is super well regarded by people who remember purchasing these in the late 90s. Now, as many people would remember, if you're an astute firearms enthusiast, you are fully aware of the 1994 assault weapons ban under then President Bill Clinton, which went into effect in 1994 and would sunset, fortunately, in 2004. Now, during that time frame of 10 years, there were limited features that were not allowed to be present on certain scary assault weapons like AR-15s and AKs. So you would have things like thumbhole stocks, non-threaded muzzles, handguns could not exceed a certain weight, you couldn't have magazines loaded into the pistol grip, vertical hand grips or forward mounting positions on pistols, trying to think, no bayonet lugs, no grenade launching devices. Nothing like that could exist on these firearms. So you would have existing companies like Colt, for example, who would come out with featureless AR-15s. You could get so-called ban-era ARs from them. And then you would have other companies that would come into existence trying to create products that would be unique and interesting on the market while also complying with those rules. And so you get companies like Professional Ordnance who would come onto the scene. Now, the interesting thing about this is a fully polymer firearm for the most part. So the buffer tube section's polymer, upper and lower receiver's polymer. And really your only metal components are the bolt carrier itself, the barrel, and your fire control group, which makes a very, very, very lightweight pistol. They also made a carbine variation of this as well. Now you're going to notice no handguard up here, so you're going to have to hold it, back here like a traditional handgun. Very crude sights up at the top like a peep sight. They did make a scope mount that you could thread into the top of the receiver, which this one does not have with it. So a very, very lightweight and legal to own firearm. Now this would come into existence in the late 90s, around 1997, 1998, and only last for a few years until the early 2000s. So the company did not make it out of the assault weapons ban. These were not very popular. The problem is because they were made of a lightweight polymer, they were not inherently durable, and they were known to receiver cracking, failures, jamming, very premature wearing and erosion of their parts and things like that. So they did not sell too well in the market, and they were very affordable for what they were. They're very inexpensive. Now, when they would go out of business, they would be purchased up by Bushmaster, who would continue with this line of the polymer framed AR-15s. Now this was known as the C15 or Carbine 15. Although Professional Ordnance as a brand would not be carried on by Bushmaster, they would continue with the name the Carbine 15. So a lot of you will remember that, or maybe you've owned Carbine 15 Bushmaster platform rifles, and even those are no longer in production with Remington being defunct at the current time. But interesting sort of a relic from that past era. Again, these were only manufactured for about 4 or 5 years, so they're very, very uncommon. You don't see too many of them, and in fact, this is the only one we've ever had in here. But because the reputation is not that great, they're not super expensive. Right now on the market, these are going for about $500 to $600, but they don't pop up for sale that often. So if it's something you used to own, maybe it was one of your first AR pistols you ever got into, you want something that's sort of a nostalgic blast from the past, or there are people who collect firearms from the 80s and 90s, sort of an interesting token from that time frame. But beyond that, they are not super reliable, super functional, or really have any main use for them other than just being sort of an interesting, again, curiosity, something along those lines. Okay, up next I have a pretty interesting rifle that comes to us from a local customer and viewer. This is the Bushmaster ACR, standing for Adaptive Combat Rifle. Now this one has a little bit of an interesting past and a little bit of a rocky beginning. Starting back in about 2007, 2008, this would actually be developed and marketed by Magpul as the Magpul Masada. In 2008, the United States military would have an open solicitation for people within the firearms or equipment type industry to come forward and show them design concepts that the military might be interested in entering into contracts with. So Magpul came forward with the Masada. Now, it did get the attention of the United States military, and there were contracts awarded to the platform, later being produced by Remington. I'll explain a little bit about that. But Bushmaster, which was a subsidiary of Remington, got the rights to manufacture under license the Bushmaster ACR for the civilian market. It was introduced at SHOT Show in 2008, and it made a huge splash. It was probably the star of the show and gained the most buzz as something that was really revolutionary for the time in the early 2000s, 2008, 2009. Taking what was known as sort of the AR-15 style of rifle, flipping it on its head and coming out with something that married a lot of military style features, nice ergonomics controls from different patterns, from things like the HK, like the Robinson Armament XCR, trying to think what else, of course the AR-15, the FN SCAR. So there was a lot of different components sort of rolled into this package, and you came up with a really, really cool weapon system. You had an adjustable short stroke gas piston. Here you could put a quick detach suppressor here at the end. The stock is side folding and collapsing, so no need for a buffer tube. AR-15 style controls, so if you're used to the AR-15, everything's there for you. A non-reciprocating charging handle, a quick change barrel system. That was sort of one of its Achilles heels, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So really, really, really cool concept. Now, there were two big promises made about the rifle in about 2008 when it was first released. One was the price. It was going to release with a beginning MSRP of around $1,500. Two was caliber conversions that would come out with the rifle. So basic, of course, was 5.56, but it did offer a quick change barrel system, which is actually really cool on this rifle. They wanted to come out with different caliber conversion kits for this, so you could switch it out to a multitude of different calibers. And the other was the release date. They wanted to have it ready for production for the civilian market by about 2009. They fell short of that, but they did get these out starting in the market in about 2010. The problem is when they released it, it now all of a sudden had a price of $2,500, so $1,000 higher than what had been promised, and there were no caliber conversions ready for the rifle. So it was met with a little bit of frustration in the market, and the sales were actually not that great on this platform. They would go into further development. A couple years later, they would have a recall due to the fire control unit allowing for multiple rounds to be fired from a single trigger pull. So everybody who had bought them had to send them back in for recall. Bushmaster had marketed the ACR for the civilian market. Remington was for the military. So there were military and police contracts, of course, on a select fire variation of the rifle. It always had a lot of popularity with people. It was always regarded as being a really interesting rifle, but the problem is it came out not meeting expectations of the market, and because of that, the sales had really been suffering on these. They were able to get the pricing down. We actually had these new in our store. There's two basic variations. There's the standard model and the enhanced. This is the enhanced. It would have the enhanced versions new for, I think, around $2,000. So a little bit lower than it had been offered. The standards were maybe $1,700, $1,800. So still pretty pricey for what they are. Now the standard model, you had a fixed stock and a mag pull forend. On the enhanced, you had a side folding stock with this quad rail section, which I actually like the standard model more because it's a lot lighter than this. And you had this sort of suppressor adapter here at the front. The standard model was just a standard A2 birdcage flash hider. And again, your price difference was about $300 or $400 between the two. They had it in black and an FDE. They also came out with a DMR version and an SBR version. Now, these would cease production in about 2019 to 2020. Finally, I would see some of the DMR versions out on the market. By about early 2020, they were pretty much completely gone. Bushmaster, Remington are closed, so these are not being produced anymore. So now I'm seeing them on the market between about $2,000 and $2,500 used. Of course, because of the rarity, something goes out of production, people want it all of a sudden. So a really, really interesting rifle. They actually are really, really, really cool if you're willing to pay the price tag for them. Just the features it offers, of course, no caliber conversions. Actually, they came out with a 450 Bushmaster version of this right at the tail end of production, so you can get that if you want. But otherwise, I've always been a fan of these. Again, a really, really rough launch, but still a cool product overall. I'm happy to share that with you guys. Okay, up next is a really unique rifle that comes to us from a viewer in New Jersey. This is a Thompson Center TCR 87 rifle. From those of you who know or are familiar with Thompson Center, one of the biggest things about them is the barrel conversion or the caliber conversion aspect of their products. Now, in 1960, the company was founded by a gentleman of the name of Warren Center, who started out by designing the Contender series of pistol. He started developing that handgun in his garage. It is a single shot top break pistol, which you can change out the different barrels on it to get a huge variety of different calibers for silhouette, target, and hunting purposes. In about 1963 to 1965, he would begin working with the Thompson Tool Company as Warren Center had, of course, come up with the brainchild of this really nice design. He did not have the manufacturing prowess, if you will, on how to get it out into the market. That's where Thompson came on board with this tool company. Together, they would create the company Thompson Center, and in 1967, they would begin marketing the products. Now, one of the first full rifle caliber conversion concepts they would come out with would be the TCR 83 in 1983, which was very much like this. Again, it is a top break rifle, and you can change out the barrel configuration to have, again, a wide variety of different calibers at your disposal. It's a very nice balance, very lightweight, single shot rifle. A really, really beautiful fit, feel, finish on the rifle as well. It is a little bit clumsy and awkward of a design. You do have to manipulate the safety features and things like that between shot, and they were actually not really out on the market as a very popular option. So in 1987, they would come out with a revamped version known as the TCR 87, which is what this is. They would not offer it with sights unless otherwise specifically requested from the factory. They would come out with a Hunter Premier or Hunter, I want to say it's like a super grade variation of the rifle as well. Still very, very beautiful bluing, really, really nice walnut stocks. Sling swivels were an option from the factory as well. But it was meant to be sort of somewhat of an updated variation of the design. Now, they would actually have a factory fire, and most of the tooling and plans for this rifle would be lost and therefore would go out of production, so it would not actually be produced for a super long period of time. But again, was also not really one of the most popular products ever put out by Thompson Center. So an interesting piece of Thompson Center history. I don't know how many people out in the market are actually interested. You know, maybe people with certain nostalgic interests in their products. The Thompson Center, you have the Encore series. Of course, you have the Contender, which they have in rifle configuration as well. You can do rifle conversion to pistol conversion with those as well. On the market, I'm seeing these in about starting at the $600 to $700 range. Of course, the price can change based on the model or the configuration or what grade it's in and things like that. So really, really cool rifle. Nonetheless, if you're a fan of Thompson Center, this is sort of one of those must-have sort of relics from the 1980s, but really, really cool nonetheless, and happy to get that in and share it with you. Okay, last but not least is a really, really cool carbine that comes to us from a local customer and viewer. So thank you so much for selling this one along to us. This is a LUSA, which was originally a Portuguese submachine gun, later adapted for the U.S. Consumer market by a couple American firms. I'll talk about that in a minute. What you have here is a Portuguese submachine gun that was intended for military and police services in the 1980s and 1990s. So the Portuguese arms manufacturer INDEP, I-N-D-E-P, was actually licensed by HK to import and produce HK variational products like the MP5 and the HK91 or G3 variations like that. Now, through the late 80s, early 90s, INDEP wanted to start production of its own design. It was very closely based off of the MP5, which I'm sure you can notice that now. The fire control group and housing are virtually identical, a straight rip-off of the MP5. There's some other features in here that are indicative of that of the Uzi, so it's kind of a married hybrid between the two. Now, unlike the MP5, which is a roller to blade blowback, this was a closed bolt, both in semi and fully automatic, and a straight blowback. Through about the 1980s and 1990s, it did see very limited success, mainly with like defensive guard units, private security detail, some police force use, not really seeing much military usage at all. And in about 1992, 1993, Portugal would actually kind of drop the project altogether and just adopt the MP5 as their standard issue submachine gun. Now, in the early 2000s, in about 2003, 2004, a gentleman by the name of Stan Andruski, as well as a couple of other business associates, would actually purchase the rights to the LUSA firearm, as well as the tooling, the dies, the manufacturing components, and all of that. And all of that would be shipped over to New Hampshire here in the United States, where they would get approval by the ATF to come out with a civilian copy of the LUSA submachine gun with a side folding or collapsing stock and a 16-inch barrel. They offered a barrel shroud fake suppressor. They did not offer a factory SBR variation, but if you wanted to, you could SBR it into what the LUSA traditionally had, which I believe was about an 8-inch barrel, about here, and have a LUSA SBR. So this is not actually Portuguese parts or anything. This was all built here in the United States, completely 100% as a U.S. built and made firearm. I cannot find any information about whether these are still in production today or not. I do not believe that they are, but I have not seen anything about the company going out of business or being acquired by anybody else, so I don't know what's going on there. If anybody knows, you can let me know in the comment section. Based on the rarity and uniqueness of this, and the fact that it did see some limited, exterior military and police service, there's usually a lot of collectability on this kind of stuff. But actually, the market on this is not too heavy. Typically, $600 to $700 is where you see these things land. So. People who have owned these have reported that the reliability, the functionality, and everything is actually very good. So they are a very reliable firearm. You sort of have an extended magazine well here. This is not the mag. The mag is, of course, detachable, 25-round box magazine, double column, double feed. So typical of like a M1A1 Thompson or things like that. So again, really reliable, pretty cool, different, and unique. So I've not actually ever had one of these in here, although I've seen them from time to time on the market. So kind of cool to get my hands. I want to try it out. Actually, something that's just, I don't know, very, very interesting and different. So I'm happy to share this with you guys, and that wraps it up for this video. All right, well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. I'm going to leave you guys off there. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.